Welcome to the Aging Together podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Pooja Ashok Patel, an occupational therapist, board certified in gerontology with additional specialty certifications in dementia, fall prevention, and geriatric care. In this podcast, I interview guests who are experts in their fields and caregivers who share their lived experiences. Let's meet today's guest. As a retired classroom educator, certified trauma specialist, and coach for neurodiverse learners, Dana Kaplan has become an internationally recognized specialist focused on accessibility, inclusivity, and rich belonging in the world. With over 2 decades researching, educating, and implementing the power within and on holistic brain health, Dana founded DEED, Developing Empathetic Education with Dana, just before the pandemic. With a later-in-life diagnosis, Dana wholeheartedly believes ADHD is her superpower and maximizes her niche approach to teaching, coaching, mentoring, and facilitating the process for deep self-awareness through nonjudgmental self-observation. While Dana's focus is on youth, birth through 28 years old, supporting parents and adults in the process intentionally provides opportunities for all of us to eliminate stigmas, release conscious and unconscious biases, and choose to build what she calls a VULNERAGEOUS, vulnerable and courageous arena, grounded in believing that we all belong. Hi, Dana. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I remember you telling me that you were an educator as your first career. So why don't we start from there? Can you start by sharing a little bit about your background and then what led you to becoming an educator?
So I have always believed that learning should be fun and that we should make a space where kids can be as authentic and as free as they want to be. And I also realized very early on that there's so much pressure on testing and fitting kids in a box. I was placed in a box so many times as a learner that I knew that something had to change. And so I decided at 5 years old that I was going to be the best dressed kindergarten teacher in the world and went off to follow that path. But there were lots of hurdles in the way. I had severe test anxiety. It was really challenging for me to figure out, the type of learning that I had. I was never diagnosed with anything, but I just knew that I learned differently, but was expected to learn typical, like as a neurotypical child and student and learner. And so fast forward, I got my master's in early childhood education because I did not get into the education school in undergrad due to a test, which was really disheartening and pushed me even harder to want to go into education. And so I got my master's, and right then and there it showed me that I was on the right path because no one gets a B in student teaching, and I did because I went off the grid and didn't follow my lesson plans. And so from day one, I've always been an out-of-the-box learner and an out-of-the-box educator. And so I pulled that B with pride because I knew that my students weren't understanding what I was teaching. I knew that it was going over their head. And at the end of the day, we get one time to really shine and make a difference in this world. And if my opportunity is going to be based on me staying in a box and making sure that kids are squished in and tied into constraints, then I'm actually not following my purpose and passion. And so I went off and disrupted education in Atlanta and taught in Atlanta, Georgia for 2 years, and then went to New York and did more disrupting and loved it. And I love taking kids out in the world and seeing life as it is and going on field trips and living their learning as reality. And what I realized in doing so is that kids actually thrive when you put them in natural settings, meaning if you go to the park and you go and do a writing experience, or if you go to the museum and you're inspired by colors and imagery and you can write your own stories that way. And so there was so much data that I collected in doing this type of work that I wanted to go out and do it on my own. And so I started my own business, and it is a coaching consulting business, DEED, Developing Empathetic Education with Dana. And my whole entire intention is for kids to authentically show up, for them to find their voice, for them to figure out how do I learn, what is best for my learning, how do I advocate for myself? And then making sure that the parents understand the same process instead of stifling the children, because a lot of times parents live vicariously through their kids. And so we want to make sure that kids find their own pathway. And my whole intention is to make sure that everyone gets to write their unique success story along the way. So that's my journey, and that's what I'm doing.
I love that you took something that you struggled with in your childhood and turned it into a passion that you utilized as a career and then now as an entrepreneur and your own consultant. I think that's wonderful. I really do think people become the best at what they're doing if they've gone through it themselves, right? Because you have that unique insider experience versus trying to do something that you don't have your own lived experience with.
I totally agree with you. And I also think that's when we can easily misconstrue people becoming victims. Like, I'm not a victim because of how I learn and what I learn and what's needed. Like, I was diagnosed with ADHD 3 weeks before I left the classroom in 2018. I mean, I knew my entire life I learned differently. There was clearly a reason that I had all this extra energy, because I could take my students on anywhere from 60 to 100 field trips a year in New York City, going on the subway, walking in the streets. Like, there's clearly a lot of energy inside of me. So being diagnosed was not surprising. But what happens is, a lot of times when you are diagnosed, you all of a sudden think that you're broken or there's something wrong with you, instead of looking at it as, oh my God, it's my superpower. No wonder I've been able to do all of these wonderful things. And so it's really important that when we recognize that we behave differently or we do something differently in the world, that it's actually going to benefit us and benefit those around us, instead of seeing it as something that is a failure, really and truly. Because to me, failing is the act of not trying. And so when we look at situations where we are trying, we are looking for new ways of finding solutions and action and making change, then we're actually doing and using our superpowers to the best of our ability, which I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer in there's no such thing as failure, just lessons learned, because that means you tried to do something, it didn't work, and now you're going to learn from that and hopefully try again with something else.
Totally agree. One of my very favorite podcasts I was on, it was about how the children were just beside themselves emotionally, mentally. It was right at the brink of on the other side of COVID, and how we needed to do so much more for kids, but people just didn't know how to do it. And so I said it then, and I truly mean it now, that like, we have to have this squishy, mushy, malleable way of working and living with who we are, because the only way we're ever going to grow independently and collectively is if we're actually accepting and inclusive of who we are as individuals. And so the more we try, the more lessons we gain, and the more learning we gain, and the more experience we gain, and the more we realize like what we can do instead of all the things that we can't do. And so it's really important that I love your vision behind actually doing.
Yeah, for sure. You know, the reason why you reached out when I was looking for guests was because of your experience in caring for your mom. And so we can kind of go into that. We'll bring everything together towards the end. But can you walk us through the events of how you became a caregiver for your mom?
So unfortunately, my mom had fallen. We were on a family vacation December a year ago, and my mom fell and hit the back of her head. And so she had a small brain bleed and had to have stitches or staples, excuse me. And there was a lot, and she's still dealing with a lot of some ringing in her ears, but she has her complete balance back and everything was going great. And then right at her 75th birthday, the day before her birthday, she fell. She was walking my dog and our family dog, and she fell and broke her hip. And so I had this hunch when I was flying from Florida to Atlanta, because we were throwing my mom a birthday party. And I had this hunch something was going on. And as soon as I landed, my mom was like, well, I got a great new birthday present coming along. And I was like, what is that? And she was like, I'm going to get a hip replacement. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And so I never thought that I would be the one taking care of my mom. I don't live in Atlanta. My siblings live in Atlanta. My older brother lives in New York. However, they have kids and they have families, and I have a different lifestyle than them. Being a solopreneur and being able to work with my students and families virtually all over the world allows me to work wherever I want to work. So it allowed me to the flexibility to actually make sure that we were getting the proper care for my mom, that we were having people come in and support her. And so I took on the role as the caretaker to make sure. And even though my father clearly could have done it, he's a very intelligent, highly competent man. If somebody else steps inside and says, hey, I'll take care of it, everyone's like, yes, thank you. And then if something goes wrong, it's like, what did you do wrong? It's all your fault. What did you do wrong? Right. And so it's this constant juxtaposition of trying to balance your own, what I call holistic brain health. You know, are you sleeping? Are you getting enough to eat? Are you exercising? Are you moving your body? Are you getting your face in the sun? Are you taking time to see your clients? Are you taking time to read books? Are you doing what you need to do in order to make sure that you're taking care of the person that needs to be taken care of? In conjunction with making sure that the doctor's appointments and all the different people are being called, and that the people that are supposed to be showing up for physical therapy or for the daytime shift or the nighttime shift are actually showing up and actually, doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it's a lot of juggling, and I never imagined having to do it. I also knew that it just made the most sense when I just stepped into it and said, I'm here. Like, this is what it is. Like, I'm not going anywhere until her first appointment and making sure. And so I think a lot of times caregiving can become a space of guilt and shame, where you feel guilty you're not doing enough, and then you shame other people for not doing enough. And I had to do a lot of inner work the whole time, making sure that I was checking in with myself, not guilting myself if I wasn't doing something, or if I needed to go and take a phone call to make sure, to ask my dad to come upstairs and sit with my mom or to do whatever. And also not to shame my siblings or my father for not doing more, because that doesn't help the situation. And so it's really important when you're being the caretaker that you remember that there can only be so many cooks in the kitchen. And when there's too many cooks in the kitchen, mayhem happens, and you miss a lot of the important pieces that can help someone thrive and get better. So it was definitely a moment in time that I am so grateful that I was able to be there for my parents and for my siblings, and also a very exhausting time, and very much a time where it was a lot of self-discovery. Like, I thought I had a lot of patience because always being a kindergarten teacher forever, you can handle 25 kindergartners, but when you're dealing with a human that's your mom and that isn't, a martyr and like doesn't want to ever ask for help. And, there's a lot of variables going on in all of it. And so it's hard to believe that where we are in the year and how far she's come, because she's walking independently, functioning independently. Everything she does is independent now. And it's remarkable. She had an amazing doctor, and the doctor, I'm so grateful, and so it also, that plays another big role in making sure that you've got the right caretaker component, like the healthcare pieces to help you with taking care of the person that's needing care itself. I pinch myself that my mom's doing as well as she is. It's really great.
Thank you for sharing that. I completely relate to you that's why I was laughing is, I primarily have worked with older adults and adults in the hospital care system, and constantly have been able to like work with these older adults and adults over the years. And, I come home and have to manage my parents and my grandma. And all of a sudden I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why is nothing working? It's like, it's a different beast, right? Because you've got family dynamics, you've got history, you've got emotions, you're attached. And then culturally, there's a lot of limitations, right? And so, when you're working with clients, it's different because there's no emotional attachment. You have your professional boundaries. You can keep your emotions in check and have an unbiased perspective, but you can't do that when you're working with your family members, right?
It's, you hit something on the head. It's staying detached or unattached. And I think for me, I am an empath. And so I feel everything. So my clients, I always know when something's going on with my clients. So I'm constantly having to do a check-in with me to make sure am I staying detached from whatever they're experiencing, because it's not my journey. It's their journey. They get to go through it. But I do think what you said is really important, because when we are able to stay detached, we can be much more awake and observant and accessible to the people that need us. But when we're attached, the emotion comes in so much faster, the reaction comes in so much faster, the fight and flight comes in so much faster. And so it's a lot of challenging moments when you are dealing with your family versus dealing with the people that you work with and work for.
Yeah.
So definitely a very important note for people to remember.
Yeah. But it's also like, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because when you try to detach yourself from the situation so that you don't let your emotions play, sometimes that comes across as, oh, she just doesn't care, or she's not paying attention, or why doesn't she care more about this? And it's like, I do care. I'm trying to provide a practical solution to something that we need help with, right? I hear oftentimes from caregivers that they feel like they're in this limbo of caring too much or not caring enough. And I wonder, what has your experience with that been like?
That is such a great question, because for me, one of my biggest challenges as an entrepreneur is making sure that I do not expect more from myself than what my clients are giving. And because I hold myself to such a high standard and expect so much from myself of what I do for other people. So one of the biggest challenges for me has been to make sure that I'm allowing my clients to be on their own journey. And the same thing I had to do with my mom when she was healing was that if she's going to get better, then she's going to have to be invested in her own physical therapy, and she's going to have to be invested in making sure that she gets up and does the exercises, and that she walks around as told, that she's invested in eating healthy to build her bones back up, right? And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity for all parties to really look and see, like, where's your investment lie and what you're doing here. Because like I said, for myself, I'm all in for everyone. Like, it's just my personality. I'm 1,000% in for anyone that I'm working with, and I want them to thrive. I don't believe in survival. I believe in thriving all the time. And so I make sure that I can do everything possible to get them into that space of thriving. But at the same time, I can only do so much. And so because of the work that I've done on myself around not trying to save people and letting them be on their own journey, it definitely made a really big difference in having and how I supported my mom. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. There were many times when I threw a tantrum like a 2-year-old and was like, Mom, get yourself together. Like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe we're arguing about eating lunch at this hour because you've got medicine to take. Like, I'm also going to be a realist. I'm a human being. And like, who wants to see their mom hurt? Who wants to see their family member in pain? And so I'm the same way with my students. Like, when one of my students broke their leg last year, I was like, are you eating ice cream and yogurt like we talked about? Because if you don't eat the ice cream and yogurt, your bone isn't going to get stronger. Like, it was comical because I was having the same conversation along the time that my mom broke their hip. And so it's a fascinating line that you sit in, and you have to be so conscious of like not taking it on and remembering that you can only do the best you can, and that whatever happens is really and truly down to the person that's healing. And if they want to heal, then they're going to heal, and they have to want it. And that's really what it has been, one of my biggest takeaways from all of it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you feel like you're dealing with the same thing at home and at work, right? Even though they're two completely different populations, different groups of people, and it's like, oh, I'm doing the same thing at home and at work, and in both situations, I don't have control, right?
So I had jaw surgery, so I've been rubbing on my mouth to try it because it's sore right now as we're talking. And so if I get stressed, all of the muscles in my face will tighten up, right? And so that same feeling of, I'm getting so stressed out. Why is this child, like, there's something going on with this child. Why are they not, or what are they not, or what am I not doing, right? So I go into this whole spiral of, I can do better. And the same thing was happening with my mom. Like, my face would get super tight because I'd be like, my mom's not listening to me. This is what the doctor said. This is what we need to be doing. She is listening to me. I can go relax for 5 minutes. Like, it is this constant juggle of how am I taking care of myself? And I think that really comes back to one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that you can only be the best caretaker of the person you're caring for is how well you take care of yourself. And so I don't mind having to massage my face in the middle of a podcast and conversation, because I know that that's how the conversation is going to be able to thrive, is for me to be able to talk, right? And so we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves in the process, but it's easily forgotten. I mean, we're all human, and as much as we want to believe that we're superhuman, the reality is that we make mistakes.
Yeah. So you flew into Atlanta for your mom's birthday, and you ultimately ended up walking into a hospital and becoming an overnight caregiver with a mom with a new hip. What did that immediate situation kind of look like? Did you end up staying immediately from then? Did you go back home and then come back?
It wasn't immediate. So my mom had her appendix taken out when I was in the 4th grade. And I came in and I spent the entire day at the hospital with her. My dad was taking care. There's 4 of us. So my dad was taking care of my 3 siblings. And I went into the hospital and laid down with my mom in her bed and took care of her and was just like, there. And I've always taken on the caretaker role in the people pleasing person in my family. And not to say that that's a good role to have. Let me be very transparent in saying that. However, that's the role that I took on as a child. And so it's very easy for me to get into that space of, I'm going to be here. I'm going to make sure that I have everything that I need. And honestly, I was in the mindset of, it's not like I'm in Africa. It's not like I can't get my medicine. Like I had one of my girlfriends come to my apartment in Florida and who has my keys and sent me a package of all my medicine. Like the things that were stressful that needed to be taken care of were quickly resolved, because when I came in for my mom's birthday's March 17th, I think I came in on the 15th. I didn't come back to Florida until early April. So I was there for quite some time. And I only left because the doctor said she was doing well. If she wasn't, if had not been progressing the way that the doctor wanted her to, I had no intentions of leaving. It really was all up to what the doctor said. And so for me, I was in the headspace of whatever I need, I can get. Like there's no one that can't help me. Like we always talk about, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to help somebody heal. And so for me, it was very much that headspace of, and I'm also a type of person that I'm like, I only hear yes. I never hear the word no. So if somebody said no to me, I would figure out how to get the yes to what I need in order to keep everything flowing and going as needed. And so it's a wonderful trait to have. And it's also an annoying trait to have, to always be very perseverant.
Great sales role.
It is. And the comedy is I'm not even in sales. And so I think, however, I do teach the power of our voice. We all have the power within to use our voice for the greater good. And so for me, I was never concerned about not having what I needed. There was, places to shop, places to go. My doctors are really flexible. Like I have anxiety and I also have ADHD. So clearly I needed meds for both of those things, and so I think that you have to really be as flexible as possible in all aspects of it. Because when I look back, I'm like, I don't know how I was able to run a business, help my mom, keep my dad in check, make sure that they weren't fighting. It's like, it's comical. It's a comical state of being. Only when you allow yourself to see the comedy in the moment, you're so not seeing comedy. You're seeing chaos and frustration and crazy. And that can be a lot for someone. And so I think it really goes back to just having a wonderful village that's really supportive and checking in on you. I mean, my siblings were constantly checking in on me. They're like, what do you need? How are things going? And we were also of the mindset of like, there's no reason for my older brother to be flying down from New York. Like, it's not like he can do anything. He can hang out with my mom, but he could just as easily FaceTime my mom and give her that same kind of one-to-one time in that space. So it's a lot of navigating what really makes sense in the moment for the person and for also the other people participating in the healing process.
I was going to ask about, the role that your siblings played. Obviously, you mentioned that they all had their own families and kids, and so it made sense in that moment for you to take on that role, and you did. And so, were they fairly involved in a different sense, or were they more of a supportive network?
They were definitely involved in a different sense. We have to keep in mind that children get really freaked out when they see their grandparents or someone that they love in pain. And so, unfortunately, my nieces and nephews had already seen my mom after she fell in December because we'd all been together. So they'd already seen this trauma moment, right? And it's not that we want to protect kids from seeing anything that is harmful, but we also want to be really mindful of like what that does to someone. So in a very short period of time, my mom fell and hit her head and then broke her hip. So it's not something that we want kids to be surrounded by all the time, that we don't want them to be fearful of like, oh my God, I could trip at any time, or oh my goodness, I could really hurt myself at any time. So it's really important to make sure that we are supporting the children and giving them the love and the care and the information that they need without giving them too much information, right? So like when my mom hit her head, it was very clear. The kids could see what happened. She was in a contraption to keep her neck straight. Like it was very visible, right? With her hip, she was just sitting. So we have to be really mindful. For me as an educator, it's very important that we give kids what they can handle. And I always talk to children as if they're an equal of mine. I never speak to them as if they're something less than me, regardless of our age gap. And I also make sure to check in with myself. How much can I handle at this moment? Because if I can't handle it, then they definitely can't handle it. And so I always go back to the fact that I'll forever be a kindergarten teacher. So I'm always going to be working with 5-year-olds. At some point in time, every human being turns into a 5-year-old. Something happens and they have a moment and they need to lash out or they need to throw a tantrum or whatever. And then they regulate, they come back, and adults are generally like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed. And then like move on and apologize. And kids take a little bit more time. With that being said, it's very important that we give kids the space they need in order to understand somebody broke something. Okay, well, my friend broke their elbow. Okay, my friend broke their arm playing tennis or basketball or what have you, or fell down the slide. So I've seen a broken bone before, but I haven't seen my friend then also get hurt again 3 months later. So that's foreign to me, right? And so it's really, like I said, it's important to make sure that kids understand it's not to shield them. It's to make sure that we're giving them as much as they can handle without giving them too much.
To your point earlier, you mentioned, it takes a village. I feel like I've repeated this on every one of the last few episodes, but it's such a common expression when talking about raising kids that it takes a village. But people don't tend to mirror that when it comes to caregiving for older parents. And it is very much the same concept. It takes a village in a very different capacity, but it still takes a village, right? Whether it's friends, family, community resources, doctors, therapists, whoever it might be, it still does take a whole lot of people to effectively be in a caregiver role, right?
And I think something that's really important that we must remember is that during the caveman times, everyone was in community. Like that's what the caveman time, the ice age, all of those times were about. Everyone was in a sense of community. You need community to get better. You need community to thrive. And so that was the whole struggle during COVID when people didn't feel like they had community, and they were relying solely on FaceTime or solely on, but we forget that is community. That is, you're still getting your needs met by, you may not be able to touch one another, but you're still having that face-to-face time with one another, and that's still connection with one another. And I think that's what's so important that must be driven home, is that when we're working with people, regardless of the age, we're remembering that the focus always is that we want to feel connection. And so when we're healing, we want to feel even more connection because we start to doubt ourselves. Like the amount of times that my mom said she would doubt herself or second guess herself. And doubting and second guessing yourself are two of the worst feelings you can have. Like you always want to trust yourself, right? And so having a community that is reminding you how strong you are, that is reminding you of all the things that you've done in the past, that is reminding you of the time that you climbed a tree and fell and didn't break your arm and miraculously got up and started running again. Like those stories are what's so important. And also what is also helpful for kids to hear, because we want to take the scary out of everything as much as we can, because that we don't want to live in a sense of fear. And so when you've got the village that comes in to tell the stories, to make the connections, to send the flowers, to send the balloons, to send their favorite cookies from 3 states over. It doesn't matter. It's still putting in the energy and putting in the effort to make the connection so that everyone feels like they're helping in that healing, because the people that are helping in the healing really do want to be helping.
Yeah.
And that's the most important piece for any person that's ever been injured to hear, is that everyone really does want to help. We just may not necessarily know how to help in the right way. We want to help.
In those early days when you were spending your time in Atlanta before returning home, what were some of the most challenging moments that you faced?
That's a great question. I think I got really frustrated with some of the helpers in the hospital. I felt like they were just signing in on the clock and leaving. And then there were others that were so amazing that I literally cried when they told me that their shift was over and who was coming next. I was exhausted, so I wasn't sleeping well. And so the first night my dad stayed in the hospital, but the rest of the nights I stayed in the hospital. And I don't remember how many nights we were there, to be honest with you, because it's all a blur. But I just remember the best nurses and the people that were helping my mom with physical therapy. And I remember, that were cheering her on when she took her first steps and getting it up and out of bed. Like, so as soon as she broke her hip and the next day she was up and out, like it happened. It wasn't like a pause. It was like, we're getting you and you're going and you're going to be walking. And so, making sure that all of the support people around us were very much on the same page. I think that was one of the biggest challenges. And then the second challenge, truthfully, was when we got home and I was finding home health care for her. And that's a luxury to have home health care. And I know that. And so to me, it's very important that the companies that run home health care remind the people that work for them that this is a luxury to have. This is not something that everyone can afford. And so to really put forth your best effort and to make sure that you remember you're not just going to house sit. You're not just going to sit on a comfy couch and eat somebody's food. You're coming in because somebody was injured and they need you. And it's your expertise to know how to help them when they're taking a shower or how to help them get dressed and to do all of these small menial tasks that are actually really important tasks because they want to get back to the space where they can do it independently. And so I think for me, it was I felt like I was back in the classroom dealing with a lot of 5-year-olds that were way older than me and having to check in with my own ego and my own self and be like, okay, maybe I need to teach them what they need to be doing here. Maybe they haven't experienced something like this. Like, what do I need to do in order to make this transition easier? So it was a lot for me. It was like having a second job, really and truly. It was my first job. And then my company, my job was like my second job is really what was going on. And so it's important to remember that just because you hire someone or just because someone's hired to do something doesn't mean they're necessarily the greatest at what they're doing. And to be patient, always speak up. I'm the biggest advocate of speaking up. I had so many people come, so many people go, and I was the first to call the company every time something was not kosher with me or my dad saw something. Like, I don't have time for people messing around with safety. Safety is number one for me always. So I think it's really about staying true to your values and your morals when you're caring for someone else, and to recognize that you may have a slip up and you may get really frustrated because you've told this person 3 times how to prepare lunch or how to make sure that to hold the strap behind with your hand in a certain way so that if they fall, you catch them instead of you falling with them, kind of thing. Like, it's a lot of checking in with yourself. And this is such a needed conversation to be having, because we hear of the sandwich position where the parents are taking care of their own parents and the parents are taking care of the kids. But in my case, because I don't have kids, and you're taking care of your parents, you're also having to take care of yourself. And the reality that a lot of times we forget that in that sandwich, there's also us. And even though we're in the middle of the sandwich, we're not always taking care of what's in the middle. And so I think it's a lot of reminders. It's a lot of touching base with yourself and making sure that are you okay? Am I okay? Am I okay right now? Do I need a break? Like, the amount of times that thankfully I told my dad, I was like, I need to go for a walk. I need fresh air. Like, I need to go do something. Right. And so I think being aware of your limits also is really important. So I think the combination of all of that and a long-winded answer is some of the biggest struggles, is making sure that you're advocating for yourself and for the person that needs help, and then making sure that you're also aware of how much you can handle throughout.
Yeah. You mentioned you had jaw surgery, and I imagine you worked with therapy and went through the whole hospital experience yourself. How did your personal experience shape your understanding of caregiving and rehab and all of that compared to how you experienced it with your mom?
So my parents wanted to take care of me, and I didn't want them to. I thought it would be too much on them. So I had a crossbite and an underbite, and they were going to do some reconstruction with my chin because I was breaking teeth, and the way that my jaw, it was all genetic, and all the alignment of my face was off. And so I thought it was going to be too much for my parents. And I was like, I don't want you bickering. I don't have time for it. I need to be healing. I need to be peaceful. I need to be calm. I did a lot of preparation for myself with a lot of meditating, a lot of calming experiences. I love my doctors. I had the best team ever. And so I think that because I'd already created such an amazing team and I'd already established this sense of what I was going to tolerate and what I wasn't, it was different because we walked into knowing that I was having surgery, right? It's different when you walk into a situation like my mom where you fall and you don't know if you actually broke your hip or you just bruised your hip really bad. And so I think that there's a huge gap in that space because, I mean, I have to praise my mom. She was so calm the entire time. There was no nervousness. She knew exactly what she was going through. I mean, granted, my grandmother had already broken her hip multiple times and had fake hips. And so my mom had experienced that process with her. And so she was like, I'm not having this happen. Like, I'm having a full on hip replacement. This is what's going on. And of course, me knowing the types of materials that I have in my face and all the Lego pieces that put my face back together. So I'm asking questions. And so I really think that it gave a sense of like, my mom had a sense of ownership and a sense of autonomy in the process of knowing that she was determined that she was having a full hip replacement. She was not having a partial. She wasn't going to do anything that was going to take her to a space where she might have to have another surgery going down the road. Like she was very conscientious of what she wanted. And so I think for me, I was just banking on my doctors doing the right thing and, putting everything the way it was supposed to go and everything lining up and doing all the different things. I didn't have that control where my mom was much more, a hip replacement is a much more quick and easy process than the type of surgery that I had. So I think that is a great question. I think that anyone that's going through surgery or that has had surgery or has been around people that have had surgery, it's an experience on its own. Like everything is, 1 minute you're feeling pain, the next minute you're not. Like it took me forever to gain feeling back in my face. I still don't have feeling down here. I'll watch my mom sometimes rubbing the upper part of her thigh where I'm like, are you in pain? And she's like, no, I think the feeling's coming back. And I'm like, that's amazing. Like it happened in March and it's now September. So in that short window of time, she's gained a lot of the sensation back, where after mine has been a little over 2 years. So I'm still healing in that sense. And so I think one of the biggest lessons is making sure that you're giving yourself enough time and space to heal, and that you're honest with the people that you're around when it's time to stop, and to be able to say, okay, I'm going to take a break now and to rest. So I think those are some of the big pieces that I learned in working with my mom, and then also reminding her to rest, and then also reminding myself to still rest now. And I think at the end of the day, it's really important that we're all so conscientious of how we're taking care of ourselves in order to make sure that we can be that caretaker for someone else, because you can only love as much as you're loving yourself. You can only handle as much as you're handling and giving to yourself. And so it's really important that we get the concept of selfishness out of our head and of being a negative or being of something that looks down upon. It's really important to be selfish and say no. It's really, especially as a caretaker, it's really important to say, no, I've hit my line. It's really important as the patient and the healer or the person that's healing to say, no, I've done enough today. And I think all of it it's all a lesson. It's all a learning process. And I think that's the hardest piece. as a caretaker and working both on all aspects of the work that I do personally and professionally, because as a helper, you want to just keep helping, but there comes a time when you can't do anymore. And it's only with the person sitting in front of you. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons.
You mentioned something that I wanted to highlight, and that's the difference between a planned versus an unplanned caregiving role, right? An expected versus an unexpected. And that's what we often see with the older adult population is that it's unexpected, right? There's a fall, there is an injury, there's an infection. Oftentimes, the adult children end up in unexpected caregiving roles like yourself. And so those are the ones that tend to bring up a lot of those different feelings that you initially mentioned of guilt and resentment and shame and all of it, right? Because there was no conversation around it and there was no planning for it and you didn't have time to process any of it, right? Versus if you are going into it with a plan, you've kind of had time to sit through and process the situation, come up with potential hypotheticals and figure out how you're going to manage everything. And it's a little easier to handle and manage. How did you balance your personal business life with this sudden change? And what strategies or resources did you find were the most helpful during your unexpected caregiving journey?
I think, first of all, because we were all together already for my mom's birthday, there was a lot of brainstorming. My best friend's husband is a surgeon. And so even though we weren't sure who the surgeon was going to be, I could reach out to him to find out, if he knew about it. Like, doctors have access to certain hospitals so they can do surgeries in. The surgery that my mom was having, he didn't have access to. So do you know this doctor? Is this the proper procedure? Is this, and then also my siblings my sister's a PA, so her knowing certain pieces as well, like the blood pressure, making sure that we're all staying calm, is everything being the anxiety component of it. And so I think that there was a lot of, because we were together, we had that planning started, like it happened on a Sunday and the surgery was on a Monday kind of thing. So I think we all just jumped in together immediately and my younger brother was at the hospital at 5 o'clock in the morning on that Monday because to meet the doctor that was doing surgery. My dad was already at the hospital because he slept over. I was at my parents' house taking care of our dog and making sure that our family dog was like getting time because then he'd be cooped up all day. And then my sister came and then, and my older brother had my nephew with him. And so I think it was a lot of, even though we didn't have a lot of time to prepare, we had preparation period. It wasn't like it happened, an immediate surgery followed. So there was a peace of mind in that sense. But I think that because of how we set it up, I knew that I was in a place where I could stay in and be in Atlanta. And because of my clients being literally global, if I needed to be in person, the meeting turned into a virtual session instead of me having a meeting in person. And the virtual sessions remained virtual, which was fine. And so we worked around it. And so fortunately, because I work with adults and kids, I had a lot of flexibility. I teach flexibility. I model flexibility. And because of that aspect, it's a core value of mine that all of my clients also embody that aspect because I want them to learn that flexibility is one of the keys of life. And so if it's an adult and they're struggling with like having to be on a rigid schedule all the time, it was actually beneficial for them to have to be moving our session back 30 minutes and have to realize that you're now going to have a 30-minute window that you wouldn't normally have. And, you're going to have to find something to do with yourself. And so there's a lesson. It goes back, I think, to what you said earlier. There's no mistakes. There's no failures. It was all lessons that benefited everyone in the process. And so I think the one that actually struggled the most was myself and like all the pressure that I put on myself to make sure that I was giving 1,000% to my mom and 1,000% to my business. And you can't do that. That was a huge lesson for me.
Yeah, it's really hard though, right? It's really hard to separate the two things and figure out how you might be spending 70 on one spot and 30 on the other at one day, and then 50-50 on another day, and then 20-80 on another day, right? And it's really hard to, I like with you speaking about like routines and stuff, I am a creature of habit. I used to have a really hard time if there was a disruption in routine or if there was like something that came out of left field, and it would really like throw me into like just complete chaotic mess, right? And over the years, I think COVID had a lot to do with it, but afterwards too, quitting my full-time job had a lot to do with it, where I didn't have that regimented structure of like, I wake up at 5 a.m., I go to work at 7, I have lunch at 12, I come home at 4:30. And then, like it was just so structured and I lost that. And I was pretty lost, I'd say, for 6 months, 8 months, because I had done that for actually probably my whole life, because I went from school to college to work. And it was just like a very regimented structure. And then like you, I became a solopreneur and all of a sudden there was no routine. There was no structure. There was constant juggling and having to be flexible of like this time or that time, or I need to change a meeting, or I need to like go run out for an errand. And it became something I had to learn and be okay with it, right, in order to grow. So I agree with you. I think if you're forced into situations that require that, then over time you learn how to be a lot more flexible and less regimented. And don't get me wrong, as an OT, I'm like huge proponent of having routines. They're good for you. But if you're living your life on a routine, it becomes really hard to manage the curveballs that life throws at you.
Which is a really important point that you make. So as an educator in the classroom, yes, we were in school from 8:20 until 2:50 every day. But what that day looked like was always different. And I did it intentionally because I had a lot of kids that were very, very rigid about schedules. And we have to teach flexibility. And so that also happens later on in life once you retire, that a lot of people get into these rigid ways of living. And so the rigidity can actually impair your healing because you're so fixated on what you want to be doing, but you're not able to do it, right? And so I think for me, I've always taught flexibility and I've always made sure that kids understand and parents, especially parents more so than kids, but because the parents build out these routines for their kids. And so the kids then feel like they have to follow the routines that have been built out for them. So when we can build out a structure where you have, I know from X time to X time, this is what's going on, meaning I have school from, like I said, 8:20 in the morning until 2:50 in the afternoon. Lots of different things are going to happen during that time, like lots of different things. And that's cool. But I do know that from this period to this period, it's going to be school time. And then I know from 3:00 until 6:00, it's going to be homework and sports time. Now, what that looks like, I don't really know, right? And it goes the same thing like with grandparents. So many grandparents are picking up grandchildren from school now. So they know that they pick the grandchild up at 3:00 and they've got until 6:00 to do whatever they want because at 6:00, it's get ready for dinner time. Dinner's at 6:15, right? It's like there's still some routine and rigidity in it, but there's a lot more flexibility. And I think that the more that we can teach the flexibility, the much happier kids are. And actually the much more happy we all are because we're not so frantic and in that chaotic fight or flight state of, oh my God, I've got to get here right now. I've got to be doing X, Y, and Z. I've got to get this done. Instead, it's like, oh, okay, well, I've got 2 hours. And in that 2-hour span, I have 3 things that I get to choose from. And I get to do all 3 things. When I choose to do them is my choice. And it's so important because I think that we can all get so lost in the habits and the pressures of society that is put on us to be, again, in the box. And we have to get out of the box. We have to crush our own glass ceilings. We have to do that regardless if we're hurt, if we're healthy, what have you. And so it gives us all a voice and saying like, I know that I have responsibilities and I'm going to get my responsibilities done. And I also am going to do it on my own timeline because I need to work differently than you work. And so I think it's really important that we give kids that opportunity to take a look at adults, working from 9 to 5. That's why the whole concept of working from 9 to 5 has changed so much because it doesn't necessarily work. I mean, it works for some, but it doesn't work for everyone. It definitely doesn't work for me. And so it's all around flexibility. And I think it comes full circle back to aging together. Like, you have to be flexible in how you're going about your day and what you're doing and who you're working with and how you're helping. And most importantly, how you're helping yourself. Because again, if you're not flexible with yourself, then you're definitely not going to be flexible with anyone else.
We've talked a lot about lessons learned, and you've shared a lot about how you've been able to apply your role as an educator to your caregiving responsibilities and journey. Have there been any lessons learned from caregiving that you find yourself applying to your professional work?
Oh my God, yes. Oh my God, yes. First of all, hands down, people show up and that's who they are. And that is really who they are. Do not expect them to change. If they show up and they're 10 minutes late, that's who they are. They're going to show up 10 minutes late every day. And either you're going to put up with it or you're not. And for me, as one that has worked on time management my entire life, I don't have a tolerance for you being late. If you are going to be coming in and doing something, get there early and be there waiting a minute or two. So it's really important for me. The other piece is contracts. When you have a contract with someone, they have to follow the contract. That is why you have a contract built. So when you are working with outside caretaking, like what we did, they have a time frame for when they're supposed to be working. There is very specific rules about being on your cell phone. Hi, child. That's why you don't have your cell phone in school. Like, there are so many cross paths that reminded me so much of the work that I do. Like, having to tell one of the caretakers to please get off their phone while taking care of my mom because my mom needed to go to the restroom. Like, I felt like I was with a high school student telling them to put their phone away in the middle of class, right? So it's really making sure that I was following through with my own contracts and my own expectations of, like, how are things going to flow, you know? And so it's a conversation I have with my clients all the time. What do you expect of me? What are your expectations? Let me tell you my expectations of myself, which is what I said earlier. I always have the highest expectations of myself. And so that can be really trying at times. And then for me, if you tell me what your own personal expectations are of you, and then I tell you what I also expect, and for us to come to a happy median, then it allows me to minimize the stress and chaos that I start to feel in my body and the anxiety that I feel in my body that you're going to disappoint. If you're saying, Dana, the best I can do is A, B, and C, and you really want me to do A through Z, we got to figure this out. I'm probably not the best person to be working with your mom. If you're cool with me doing A through F, and we can come to terms with A through F getting done every single day, and we're both happy, and everyone ends up safe and everyone ends up happy and healthy and thriving, it's a huge win. And I think that, and so I've always incorporated the piece about what are your expectations of me with all of my clients. And truthfully, I even did it in the classroom with all of my parents, even though that wasn't even part of my job. Like, to ask parents, what do you expect of me, is comical because they weren't paying me. It was the Department of Education. And so it's just who I am. And so I always think about, how do I want to provide the most exponential experience for anyone that I'm around? And how do I want them to receive it? And what do I want them to remember from the experience? And so for me, it reminded me to continue doing a lot of the things that I am doing. And then it also reminded me to get a little more structured on the things that I had been loose on, like especially with the contract piece. And so, I mean, again, I learned so much from all of it, especially watching these people trying to run a business with 500 or 600 people, and I'm a solo person, and so it's so fascinating. It was a really fascinating experience.
Yeah. I still have like a laundry list of questions. I feel like we could talk for hours, but being mindful of the time, we do need to wrap up. And so as we wrap up, what advice would you give to others who may find themselves in a similar or unexpected caregiving situation?
Please be patient with yourself. The amount of pressure that you end up putting on yourself to do everything is just, it can actually destroy you internally, both emotionally, physically, mentally, holistically. It's very important to make sure you know when you need a break, and especially to ask for it. And if you're not getting the breaks you need from, if there's certain people that are saying, sure, I'll give you a break, but they never show up, then you need to find other people and you need to make sure it happens, because you have to take care of yourself in order to take care of other people. And I think the word grace just keeps coming up for me a lot, is like, give yourself grace, give the person that's healing grace, give everyone grace. Like it's a scary time and it's all unpredictable. And most importantly, it's always temporary. And so whatever happened on day 1, 36 days, 48 days later, the healing process works its magic and life goes on. And so it's really giving yourself grace and space to see the growth, to see the accomplishments, to know that today's hard and tomorrow's going to be better. So I think those are the big pieces.
Dana, thank you so much for coming on the show, for this wonderful conversation, and for sharing your journey.
Thank you so much for having me. I think what you do is amazing. And I think it's so important that you have this podcast for people to really think, hold on a second, people are aging. Why aren't we talking about it? We're talking about it, but we're not doing anything about it. And I love that you've created this space where it's both talking and doing. And so I think it's remarkable. And I'm really impressed that you're doing this and helping so many people on so many different levels.
I hope that's the goal. Thanks so much, Dana. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Aging Together podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Aging Together, LLC, a caregiver coaching service with educational programming and support services for family caregivers of older adults. This episode was produced by me, Dr. Pooja Ashok Patel, in partnership with Natural Eye Media. If you found this episode of the Aging Together podcast valuable, we'd love your support in spreading the word. Please subscribe to the show. Your likes, shares, and reviews fuel our mission. Don't forget to rate and leave a review wherever you're listening. Your feedback matters. Until next time, take care.